Hey, welcome to Rookie Pastors Podcast, a podcast of real conversations about real ministry by real pastors. Today, I am joined by Dustin Slayton and Bryan Colley. I forgot to mention my name. I'm Josh Prince.
Josh Prince.
Yeah, well, if you Google, there's other ones. But for this podcast, I am the Josh Prince. So we have a little different of a topic to discuss today. But before we can really get into that, I do have a opener question for us. It's on point. I'm kind of proud of myself for thinking of a opening question that actually has to do with the episode that we're going to discuss. Not throwing shade at any of the other opening questions we've dealt with so far, but here it is. Anyways. What is the funniest or most unexpected thing you've found at church? Now, could be like a campus thing or like this long rumored thing that existed, whatever it might be. What has been the funniest or most unexpected thing you've found at church? Dustin, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Mine's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. So, I walked into my office one day. It was like a Tuesday morning, I think, and walked into my office, opened the door, and immediately got hit by the smell of a skunk. And I'm on the second floor, so I didn't know what was going on. So I kind of walked around my desk, and I saw a skunk tail sticking out from under my desk. And so I immediately shut the door, and I kind of trying to figure out what is going on. I'm like, okay, well, it didn't move. It didn't chase me. I'm not dead. And so I opened up the door again, kind of went around. It hadn't moved. Kind of peeked around and realized it was a dead skunk in my office. And so what had happened is we had a facilities guy who was kind of a practical joker, good old country boy. And he had found a dead roadkill skunk on his way to church the previous Wednesday. And so he thought it'd be super funny to take that skunk, put it in my office, let me find it. We'd all have a big laugh, and then he would take it home after church that Wednesday night. What happened is he wound up having a mild heart attack at church that evening. And so he left church in an ambulance. And I usually didn't go back to my office after church on Wednesday because it was in a different building. And then I was out of the office for all the way from that Thursday until the following Tuesday. So it sat there, a dead skunk full of maggots, sat in my office for like 5 days with nobody knowing it. And so they had to get professional cleaners to come in 4 times to clean my carpet to try to get the smell out. And when I was moving from that church 3 years after that, I had to get down under there to, get some stuff out from under my desk. And when I got down there close to the carpet, you could still smell a little bit of a faint hint of the skunk. So that's the most unexpected thing that I've ever found at the church.
Wow. All right, Bryan. Good luck.
Disgusting. Yeah, I figured, you were going to tell us something about your church was becoming a snake handling church with the snake in your children's building.
That was yesterday, actually.
Yeah,
that was yesterday. So
yeah, that's nuts.
I'm going to use that as some sermon illustration at some point. See, snakes can make it into the church too. You got to be careful.
That's right.
Some spiritual point. Sorry. Anyways, go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, mine has nothing to do with animals. We had gone to a new church, and it was in a very old building. They were in the process of relocating, building new facilities and everything. And like a lot of old churches, there's a flower room, right? That's where all the flowers for the funerals and all that stuff. It's also can be called a casket room, where they keep the caskets before they bring them out for the funeral. In this particular case, they also had a hole in the wall, which was odd, but not uncommon for this type of this old building. It was falling apart. But legend has it, and I do not know this to be true because I did not look down in that hole or stick my hand down the hole, that when someone was cremated, they would pour some of their ashes into the hole of that wall, and they just had a pile of body ashes in that building. And I found that extremely odd and morbid, and yeah.
Pour some out.
Who
was the first one to think of that? Hey, there's a hole. Let's pour some of their ashes in here.
There was a deacon who said, "I will always be watching." He
Oh,
wanted his ashes.
my grandparents were Episcopalian, and the back of the sanctuary was a deposit wall for all of the ashes. And so like my grandparents' ashes are in the back of an Episcopalian church in Arlington somewhere. So I mean, that
Wow.
seems a little more legal and
It
less
sounds
odd.
much
But
holier.
Full of
Yeah.
all
pageantry.
right, so I've got something. I'm going to take a completely different direction. I haven't like found any odd thing. I mean, there's always odd things, but it's more something I found out about kind of the history of the church I was at previously. So I was at First Baptist Saxe, which is just on the outskirts of Garland, and I found out that I don't know if I think it was in the 80s. They had a guy that came and visited the youth a couple times. His name is David Koresh, who grew up in Garland. And apparently he'd come to the youth a couple times. If you're unfamiliar with David Koresh, he is one who started the cult, the Branch Davidians, that led to the
He's
massive.
Jesus.
He was Jesus, yeah. I would suspect that when Jesus comes back, he's going to start in Texas because why not? But anyways, so yeah, I found out that David Koresh had visited the church a couple times. Apparently, we didn't. Well, either they left a mark or they didn't leave a mark. I'm not sure how you want to look at it, but fun stuff. Well,
So visited the church, like just attended, or actually
yeah, like
led
came to
something?
the youth just a couple times. Like I think
Oh, okay.
he had a friend that invited him, and he came. But yeah, he got like a pretty tough past too, which who doesn't in a cult?
So he didn't give the Wednesday night talk in student ministry.
He never preached or anything like that. But maybe we started him out on a journey that we wish we wouldn't have. All right,
Josh,
well, let's move on.
One day we need to go down the roles of the crazy that has come out of Garland.
You
There's
can
quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. We've talked a lot on this podcast about like the spiritual and mental health of the pastor. We've talked about strategies. We've talked about vision, all that kind of stuff. And today I feel like, although it definitely has to deal with the health of a church and how we lead and organize a revitalizing situation, it still feels a little bit different. Like, so specifically, what we are talking about is the importance of creating a more modern aesthetic in historic churches. Maybe it's just churches that maybe there's dilapidation to some degree, or maybe it's just that it's set for a while because there hasn't been a need to modernize. There hasn't been a concern for any form of modernization. One of the things that I was kind of thinking of this morning in preparation was throughout PAVE, we have been reminded to display the church that you want to become. And how that's always played out is you would have young people interactive. You would allow the generations to be represented. So have a kid read a Bible verse or have a college student pray or whatever it might be. And I think that strategy of displaying the church you want to become could actually work towards what we're talking about today in the wisdom that we need to have and how our campuses can display new life. But before we get into talking about kind of modernizing the campus, giving it a new, fresh look, what common challenges have you guys found you've faced as you're dealing with the maintenance of the properties of the church? Like what are some of the common challenges you've come up against or you've heard about, and how have you worked to overcome those things? Dustin, why don't you go first?
All right. So here at our church, we're a pretty historic church. We're 177 years old. Obviously, our buildings aren't that old. I think our oldest building is our chapel, and it's been around since the early 1900s. But a big challenge that we were facing whenever I came here, and they were beginning to kind of address, was deferred maintenance. Part of that came because we had a lot of debt for a long time in the early 2000s, all the way up until 2021 when we got that paid off. And so a lot of their money each month was going towards paying off that multi-million dollars worth of debt. So we had deferred maintenance on air conditioners and different things like that. And so we've kind of had to play catch up on some of those things. Thankfully, we've been able to do that in the last few years. We actually budget to replace so many air conditioners every year because we have a pretty large footprint, a large campus, lots of old buildings. And so that's something that we have to deal with. And then, just we have the ongoing maintenance issues of, having old buildings, having leaks that we find whenever the rain comes or whenever a big storm comes. And like was mentioned a while ago by Bryan, we had a snake in the kids' hallway yesterday, which probably tells us that there's a hole somewhere that it got into. And so we've got to, that's what Tracy is working on today, is trying to get our facilities folks to figure out, where did that snake come in? And so we just have things like that. Not long after I got here, we had a rat get in and chew the organ cable in half. And so if you go to a small church, which, probably most first time pastors are, you're probably going to be going to a church that's got some old building issues. And those are just things that are going to not really go away. You're just going to have to kind of ongoing having to address those. But there are some ways that you can take care of those things on a semi-permanent basis.
Yeah. What about you, Bryan? What are some of those challenges you had to face?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things about church life and church world is um, dollars in the real world don't equal dollars in the church world. And so people freak out at the cost of replacing something at the church. They're like, oh, we could never do that because it costs so much. But at your home, well, we have to do this. This is our home, and so yeah, it costs a lot of money, but just like in your home, if you defer the maintenance in your house, it's going to cost you more money in the long run. And so just kind of reshifting that mindset of, you know, stewardship is not just giving your money, it's taking care of the resources that God has given you. And your facility is a resource that God has given you. And so you've got to put money back into that, and you have to be wise to that. And you know, if you're walking into a situation that's deferred a lot of issues, do what you can to take care of them strategically. Like, what's the what's going to be the greatest long term cost, but also give us more reward at this point. Like, hey, we live in the middle of Texas in summer, and our ACs don't work real well. Versus, that carpet has a stain on it. We need to replace all the carpet in the building. Let's go ahead and make people feel comfortable with the AC if we can, and do the carpet later. Because you never know, that person that comes in that might be have the wherewithal and the want and the calling to take care of replacing your carpet might be uncomfortable because your AC is not operating properly because you haven't taken care of it. So they're never coming back to even have that opportunity. You kind of have to look at it from a strategic standpoint. Um, and then you know, you have to think, okay, what is the cost of us, at some point, like the church that that I was last student pastor at, they had to sit down and say, okay, what is the cost of repairing this building to not just functional, but to where it is um, a tool for us to use versus completely building something new. Like, what you have to weigh the cost on that. And so we all love meetings, right? And love meetings with committees and things like that. But you got to have those, and you got to be willing to have those conversations, but push and stretch some people with you get some hard data, get some good ideas, and go.
Yeah, I think the deferred stuff to me has been, because if you're coming into a church that's a revitalization, there's most of them are not going to be financially healthy.
Hmm.
And so that is right. It's all those little deferred things. You just buy time with as much as you possibly can. And so you've got to address that. Yeah, I had a meeting this morning. We had to delay our recording today because I had to jump into a meeting real quick with our finance and property chair to discuss some major issues that we're having. We've had a steeple that's been leaking since they put the new roof on sometime 10 plus years ago. And it's funny because some guy the other day was leaking. We had buckets that were receiving the water, and he was like, man, we've had that problem forever. And it's it hasn't even been deferred because we didn't want to pay for it. It's been deferred because we didn't really want to deal with it. Like we didn't know who to ask and who to come in. So,
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes that is, I found that one of the big challenges though, is we have inherited as churches so much stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
we had a library, and most of the library was made up of donations that were given after somebody's mom or grandmother passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And what we end up getting, right, is not the best. It's what was left over. And like, well, it didn't sell in the garage sale, and none of the kids and grandkids wanted it. Not even the neighbor, when we put it out on the curb, wanted anything to do with it. We just needed to bring it somewhere. So here it is. And so, I was thinking there was like this fad back during the COVID times. I can't remember what it's called. It starts with a K or something like that. But you would hold something and decide if it brought you joy. Y'all remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Like you hold it, you say, does it bring me joy? And if it brings you joy, then you get to keep it. If it doesn't bring you joy, then you get rid of it,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like we had to go about doing that. Like, what do we actually need? Like, what is important, right? There's decorative pieces that matter. Like they need to be had. We need to keep them because they're historical to some degree. There's other things that we bought at Hobby Lobby because it was 40% off and we just needed decoration on that wall. So I think some of the challenges of maintaining the property is also what you've received over time, what needs to be kept, what needs to be gotten rid of, because ultimately we become like hoarders in our own churches. That's one of the paved things that we've talked about, right? You have classrooms filled with stuff, not with people. So that's always a pretty big challenge.
I think kind of on that same note too, like I remember a long time ago, we were building a student ministry add-on, and the discussion was, do we buy new furniture or do we just take people's hand-me-downs? And the argument to not buying new furniture was, well, they're teenagers, they're just going to tear it up. But the argument against that was, if you have new nice stuff, they're more apt to take care of it than if it's old ratty. We took this out of the house 20 years ago and it's been in storage.
Yeah.
But then you also have to remember, it's just stuff, and if something breaks, it's being used, and you want that. You want your building to look nice, but you have to be okay if there's a scuff on the wall, or you can see where a hole was patched because a little kid was running too fast and tripped and his head hit the wall, type stuff. Like,
Yeah.
There's a fine balance there.
Yeah. So, part of getting the church focused is involving the church into, figuring out the strategies, figuring out what can we do, what needs to be done. So what have you guys found have been effective ways to involve the church members in caring for the facilities?
So we did something about a year ago. We had a cleaning day. We got, just announced that we're going to have a day where we just all come up here, work on the mornings, and, we had donuts and all that kind of stuff. And we just kind of sent people with assignments throughout the church to kind of do a deep cleaning, because we have a cleaning crew throughout the week, but there's certain things that every now and then just needs a really good, deep scrubbing in the corners of the stairs and stuff like that. And so we just sort of tackled that and got a lot done in just a matter of hours. So it was a good thing. We've also got a group of guys that are retired and, they've got spare time on their hands, and they come up every Tuesday. We call them the nail benders, and they do a whole lot of projects around the church. So they'll repaint a room, patch a hole, things like that. They'll, whenever we do our big Christmas play on the square, every Christmas they build the stage and then they take the stage down and they decorate the stage for VBS. And so they just do a whole lot around the campus. And so that saves a lot of money because they're all very qualified guys that can do a lot of routine maintenance kind of stuff. And so our main facilities guy takes them to lunch every Tuesday, as payment, and they enjoy the fellowship. And so that's one way that we've involved the church in caring for the property.
Yeah, I've heard more of that. We have a local church. They don't even have a cleaning company. They have a rotation of volunteers in their church. And now that can be treacherous. It can be, it could set you up for some failure issues, but for them, it's been really successful. And, one of the things that I've heard more and more, maybe it's not them cleaning regularly, but there's a crew that's coming in semi-regularly that's taking care of those little check-off projects that are, easy to get done but necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan, you got any, congregational involvement on that?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Dustin said. I think, cleaning can be tricky because if it's volunteer, because there's certain areas that need to be really clean, that kind of stuff. I think landscaping is a great way to do that. A lot of churches are just spending so much money on a landscaping crew for 5 months out of the year to mow when you could take a portion of what you're spending on that. And you get a mowing crew in your church, and they can bring their own mowers up. A lot of these guys have these zero turns that they want to show off. It's like the old classic car. It's now the zero turn club. But if you don't have anybody like that owns that stuff, those things have gotten relatively inexpensive these days. Buy one, find a place to store it, and then put together a crew of people that they take care of the property, whether on a rotation basis or together, and they fellowship together. We talk all the time about people connect to the church when they have shared experiences, and curb appeal. We're going to talk about this here in a minute. There's some ownership in that when they know they're the ones that did it. Like they made it look good, that kind of stuff. I think there's certain things you need to probably look at hiring out, but there's also this is where it goes back to knowing the people in your congregation and what they're good at and what they enjoy. And, you might have a businessman in your church, but his hobby is woodworking or carpentry, and he could come and knock stuff out that needs to be taken care of. You know, and you just might have to furnish the supplies. Sometimes they'll even say, "No, we'll take care of this. Just consider it a donation." You just have to be proactive with it, um, and I think it begins from the stage of, "Hey, these are the." We don't want to talk facilities a whole lot because that means money, but these are some very real challenges that we're facing. And we just want to lay them out before you and ask you to pray about how can the church take care of them. And that's giving them a spiritual component to a material problem. But you'd be surprised. You wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you would be amazed at the blessing that people are that you never thought of would be like, "Hey, I've only been coming to church here for a couple of weeks, but I can help you take care of that. I've got a guy, or I can do that." And those problems get fixed when you didn't even um, think about it.
Yeah.
I know a church is dealing with a roof issue right now, and they didn't know how they were going to pay for it. And somebody was like, "Hey, we've got some land sitting across the street that we're never going to um, probably use. Let's look at selling that land to help pay for this roof issue because the roof issue is more important than a vacant lot." And so, but if you don't inform the people of it, you can't get them involved in it.
Yeah.
And
I think a big thing to remember
I
when
think.
you do that,
Oh, go ahead. Dustin.
sorry, is that you're asking people to volunteer, and it may not be their specific area of expertise. And so, don't be a macro. If you're asking for help and if you're asking the church to chip
Mhm.
in, don't be a micromanager and don't expect perfection. Identify the places where you need it to be crisp and professional, like your
Mhm.
welcome lobby or your stage presence, or something like that. Where you need excellence, maybe those are the things that you hire out. But especially if you're in a small church, if you can rally some people to mow the grass, then great. And just
Mhm.
be okay if it's maybe not done to the exact specifications that you would like. I was
Yeah.
at my first church. We had a guy who did the yard every week, and instead of weed eating, he used Roundup around all of the sidewalks and around the church. So we had this dead strip around everything in our church. And I had people say, I was just the youth pastor. And he's like, y'all need to tell Morris that he needs to quit doing that. And he needs to weed eat. And I said, "Are you going to come out and weed eat? Are you going to come out and do it?" And he's like, "Well, no, I don't have time." I was like, "Well, then I'm not going to say anything." So you got to be willing to let people
He was,
serve in the way that they need to.
yeah, he was giving them a real world example of what it means to move from dead to
There
life.
you go. I like it.
And
Yeah, that's what it was. Well, good stuff. So what are, we kind of alluded to this in some of the discussion already, but what are some of the low cost, high impact ways churches can improve their curb appeal? that you guys have seen or, experienced yourselves? What have been some of those low cost, high reward, high impact type of things?
Mulch and fertilizer.
There you
You know,
go.
you throw fresh mulch in your flower beds once a year. Pull up the weeds, throw the mulch, fertilize your grass, make it green. Um, Move inside, same thing. You can slap a coat of paint on something, and it makes it look brand new. And those are simple. You know, um, could be putting lipstick on a pig, but you're still, that's what curb appeal is, right? You want to get them
Yeah.
past that initial um, thing. Make sure parking lots are expensive to recoat, um, but you can still make sure they're free of debris and major potholes and that kind of stuff, even if you can't afford to seal your whole parking lot or redo your whole parking lot.
So one of the exercises we used to do at a church I was at was we would walk the facilities or we would walk the campus like a guest, which is really hard to do,
Mhm.
right? Because you get used to certain things. Like, yeah, that's broken, but here's why it's broken and here's how much it costs. But like how much of it is an eyesore? So if you park where a guest parks and you walk the way most guests would walk, what is visually before you that needs to be addressed? And so I think one of the low hanging fruit type things that we can take care of almost always is signage. It's not going to cost you a ton and it's going to last for a
Mhm.
while. And so like, just putting out signs, directional signs, all that kind of stuff, it actually enhances your space. When someone, our parking lot gets used often because of where we are, like just in downtown usage. And I think there's certain things that people would see like, oh, if I visited that church, there's all these little directional things that would help me out if I were to go there. But on a guest front, like where are they walking? So we just had some maintenance stuff done in an area that all of our guests walk by. And I loved it because our property committee was like, we've got to address that because it looks ugly. And we don't want our guests seeing something that looks that ugly. We need to go back and fix it now. So one, that's encouraging to me because there's a heart for that, but there's an understanding that's taking place. Like we've got to put our best foot forward on all of this stuff. So if you walk it like a guest would walk, you address kind of those high traffic areas from the parking lot, guest entryway, the lobby, the worship center, and the kids space, especially. Making those things. We came to a facility that was okay, but just needed little adjustments starting out. We needed some big adjustments too. Like we needed to really remap and redo some layout stuff. But we could do some of that lower stuff of just making sure the security looked really good for our kid space and just the
Mhm.
entryway of our kid space look nicer. So there's little things that you can do. And I think, Bryan, your point on sometimes it's just paint. Like you update the paint color, that's going to help. You pull out some weeds or put down an extra plant, definitely mulch, like all of that kind of stuff. It's not going to cost you a ton, but there's definitely a high reward. You got anything to add, Dustin?
Looks like Brian's got something to add.
Yeah, I was going to add something to
Add it,
that,
Bryan.
Josh. Um, and if you struggle with paint colors, like what's a good paint color that's attractive? Go to model homes. Go to, if you don't have model homes, go to like really successful businesses, and walk into their lobby and see how they have their decorations and if you can't, most of us can't afford an interior decorator or don't have one in our church. Just go be observant.
Mhm.
And I mean, even if it's you know the the AT&T store or the a grocery store, and just see how they are um, making their spaces inviting, and copy it. You know, copy those color schemes, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah. And a lot of times the things that we see, especially if we're coming to a new church, is the big things, like, oh, my church was built in the 60s and it looks like it. Or we've got we got super low ceilings and I wish we could raise the ceilings. Well, those are things you can't do probably. And if you did do it, it would be super expensive. But a big thing when we went to our previous church, on the Sunday, the View of a Call Sunday, they didn't have hardly any young adults and they didn't have any nursery kids hardly ever. And so we took our two boys, put them in the nursery, and we noticed that they were like pulling out toys from the corners. And back in the corners was like the cobwebs with the dead crickets in it and little white, spider eggs. And so we were like, okay, well, hey, from the get go, we've got to do some just general cleaning, because if a parent comes in, drops their kids off, and their kid comes back chewing on a dead cricket, we're gonna have some issues. And so those are some really, I mean, that doesn't cost you anything. Just get in there and just clean it up. Um, Smells, old buildings can have some funky smells. So just getting some air freshener things and putting around the church just to kind of keep the smell looking good, smelling better is a good thing. And then lighting, especially a lot of older churches had really dim lighting. That was just kind of the style and back then. And they have small windows. You don't have a whole lot of big, huge bank of windows to let in natural light. And so strategically placing some lamps in the corners just to kind of brighten the room. So what you're talking about, Bryan, some modern aesthetic to kind of bring that in. And listen, you can even get a little bit fancy and like put some, put an Alexa in the corner to where it turns on the lights for you and kind of keeps the lighting at a certain level at certain times of day. And those are really small things that you can do just to kind of brighten up the room, make the room feel cleaner and more refreshed. Wash your windows. Those are just all really simple things that can be done to help with that curb appeal.
Yeah, a hotel lobby is another good place to go, because that's they're welcoming. And you said that reminded me, air fresheners can be great. Don't overdo it, because some people are very sensitive to scent. But air fresheners, there's a hotel collection stuff out there that you can get really good, not overbearing scents for a little bit of money, but it doesn't cost much, and your place always smells welcoming and inviting, and not that old mothball when you walked into an old Baptist church because it smells like mothballs.
Yeah. I think you could naturally test yourself if you're a church leader or pastor, if you were to drive through your neighborhood and just kind of be judgmental for a moment and look at the houses that of the locations that you would most like to go to and least like to go to. Right. And because it's all about the curb, it's all about what you see. And that's what guests are grading it on, right? They look at our Google reviews, they look at our social medias generally. I mean, that's a high likelihood of interaction with us. Some of them are going to do a drive-by. We have, it seems like I'm proud to say that one of the biggest ways people are saying they've found our church recently has been by a personal invitation, which is huge for us. It used to not be the number one. But in our most recent guest lunch, that was the biggest thing. But the second thing was drive-by. And so that speaks to it. Like, and we're bland. Our building is tan. It kind of mixes in. It's easy to pass by as large as it is. And so one of like the little things we did is we threw up lights. We put in up lights. We didn't throw up lights. We put in lights that shine up on these little columns that go on the front of our church, just as a visual aid, so it's not as easy to pass. We updated some signage and made it simple, modern, easy to read. That just is our logo, our name, and our website. There was a marquee before, and we weren't using it. It was really frustrating. So just those little things. There's always these little things that you can do that just make it pretty. And so if you were to experiment, just drive through your neighborhood, drive through your town, and just recognize how easy it is for you to judge those places as places you want to go or don't want to go. That's the same way people are looking at your churches. So it's worth addressing. It's worth upkeep. Any lingering thoughts you want to share, guys?
Yeah, I think those are all some great ideas. The things that you can do just to make your church kind of pop are good things. Even if you've got ugly old brick, you can paint those. It's not necessarily cheap. It may not be called a low cost budget item, but you can paint your brick, freshen up your building, make it brighter. Lighting does a huge thing. We've been talking for a couple of years about doing a lot more landscaping around, but we're in such a drought area that we have water restrictions, and so we just haven't really done that last couple of years. But hopefully, we'll get to the point where we can do a lot more landscaping and stuff like that, just to kind of boost the appeal. Because you're right, all those things just visually, whenever you look at it, you're thinking they keep up with their property or they don't. You kind of make that initial judgment, and it's hard to overcome those things sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we On Sunday mornings, we get tunnel focused and we go straight to our church and don't pay attention to anything outside our walls and everything. And I would challenge you, if you're ever on vacation or you have a Sunday off, or um, maybe you have two services and you have Sunday school in between, or you have Sunday school before your service, just take some time on a Sunday morning to drive around other churches in town and look at what their their buildings look like. Do they have, is their parking lot full, or does it look like nobody wants to go there? And then put compare that to what their building looks like. You know, do they have the big street flags? That draws people's attention to it. And when I see one of those and I see a full parking lot, my first thought is they've got something going on in that church that people want to be at. Like, it just gives me a whole different vibe than when I drive by a church that has no windows, all the doors are closed, nobody's outside, and there's like 15 cars outside. And you're like, that doesn't look very inviting to me. But it's hard for us to remember that on our regular Sunday mornings. And so I just encourage you to go and just take some time and do that on a Sunday morning, even if it means you miss part of a Sunday that you would be talking to some of your people, because it's valuable information for you to then take back and say, hey, y'all go do this. I'm okay if you're late to church one Sunday, just one Sunday, and do that. So.
Yeah. Well, good thoughts, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. As always, we want to encourage you to follow us on all the social medias at Rookie Pastors Pod, or at Rookie Pastors. On X, it is at Rookie Pastors Pod. And take a minute to share this episode, or maybe go back and find one of your favorites and share it out with people. Help us get the word out. Our next episode, we're going to be talking about raising the bar in ministries. So very kind of on par here with what we're talking about, but more specifically, ministerially wise, how we can raise the bar. Until then, my final thought to you is go pull some weeds at your church. Find a weed and pull that weed, and the Lord will be honored in that. All right. So thanks for listening. We will talk to you
later.
next time.